What if the person you loved most believed lies about you instead of the truth? Imagine giving everything to a family, only to be cast aside in an instant. If you've ever faced betrayal or seen someone torn down by false accusations, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you're watching this video from the very start, let me know below. Stay tuned, this story will keep you hooked until the very end. My name is Easter, and at 34 years old I believed I had built the perfect life. For 7 years, I poured my heart into being not just Mark's wife, but also Jake's stepmother. I cheered at every football game, cooked his favorite meals, and turned a quiet house into a warm, welcoming home. I thought we were unshakable until one night, everything collapsed. Mark, the man who once swore he trusted me above anyone else, chose to believe his son's cruel lies over the truth that lived in his heart. That night was the moment the life I had carefully built was ripped from under me. 3 weeks later, when Mark finally called, he wasn't looking for answers, he was waiting for an apology. He expected me to beg my way back, to admit to sins I never committed. But when we met, I didn't bring tears or excuses. I brought something else entirely, something that would change his world forever. And in that instant, Mark realized he hadn't just underestimated me. He had lost me, and the truth he refused to see was about to cost him more than he ever imagined. I knew that blending families would have challenges, but I was committed to making it work. Jake was entering his teenage years, and I understood there would be natural resistance to a new authority figure in his life. I made consistent efforts to bond with Jake without trying to replace his mother, who lived in another state and saw him only during summer breaks and some holidays. I attended his football games, cheering loudly from the stands and learning the rules of a sport I had never followed before. I cooked his favorite meals, making note of his preferences and dietary likes. When he struggled with algebra, I spent evenings at the kitchen table helping him work through problems, drawing on my own academic strengths. There were moments when I thought we were breaking through. Occasional family movie nights where Jake would actually sit through the entire film without being glued to his phone. A surprising Saturday afternoon, when he asked for my help on a school project about marketing, acknowledging my professional expertise. The Christmas morning when he actually seemed genuinely pleased with the gaming laptop I had researched extensively to make sure it was exactly what he wanted. Mark noticed and appreciated my efforts. He would often pull me into his arms after Jake had gone to bed, thanking me for being so patient and loving with his son. Those moments of recognition meant everything to me. Validation that my efforts were seen and valued. My friend Sophia from work became my sounding board through this adjustment period. As a stepmother herself, she understood the balance of building a relationship with a child who might see you as an intruder. Over lunch breaks, she would offer advice and sometimes warnings about teenage manipulation that I often dismissed. Believing that Jake and I were slowly building something genuine, our home became a place I was proud of. I transformed the living room with comfortable sectionals and warm lighting that invited conversation and togetherness. The kitchen became my domain, filled with cooking gadgets and the constant aroma of home-cooked meals. The backyard, once just a plain lawn, now featured a beautiful patio where we hosted summer barbecues for friends and family. Mark's parents, Barbara and Richard, initially welcomed me with open arms. Barbara would often comment on how nice it was to see her son happy again, and Richard appreciated how I had created a stable home environment for his grandson. Family gatherings were pleasant, if sometimes a bit formal, and I felt I was slowly earning my place in the extended family structure. As time passed, I began dreaming of expanding our family. Mark and I had discussed having children of our own, agreeing to wait until Jake was a bit older and our family dynamic more established. I imagined a little brother or sister for Jake, hoping that a new sibling might help cement our family bonds. There were occasional moments that gave me pause, fleeting instances when Jake would give me a cold look when his father was not watching or make a dismissive comment about something I had done or said. But I dismissed these as normal teenage mood swings, nothing concerning enough to address directly. I convinced myself that these were just bumps on the road to building our family, believing that with enough love and patience, Jake would eventually fully accept me. I threw myself into being the perfect wife and stepmother with wholehearted dedication, certain that my genuine care would eventually win over any lingering resistance. Looking back now, I realize I was so focused on creating the perfect family that I missed the warning signs that were starting to appear. Subtle indicators that beneath the surface, trouble was brewing that would eventually explode into the betrayal that changed everything. The shift in Jake's behavior was so gradual that at first I barely noticed it. As he entered his junior year of high school at 17, I attributed his increasing distance to normal teenage development, but the pattern became impossible to ignore. Family dinners, once a non-negotiable part of our routine, became punctuated by Jake's empty chair and text message. Excuses about study sessions or extracurricular activities that ran late. One evening, after Jake had missed 3 dinners in a row, I prepared his favorite lasagna specifically to entice him home. When he texted that he was staying at a friend's house to work on a project, I felt a distinct sting of rejection. Mark simply shrugged it off, saying, "That is high school for you. The projects always seem to happen at other people's houses." I started noticing other concerning behaviors. Walking past Jake's room, I overheard him on the phone with friends, his voice dropping to a whisper when he realized I was nearby. Once I distinctly heard him say, "She is always in my business," followed by an eye roll when he saw me in the hallway. Then small items began disappearing around the house. My silver bracelet that I usually left on my dresser vanished without explanation. $40 went missing from my wallet when I could have sworn I had just withdrawn $60 from the ATM. When I mentioned these incidents to Mark, he suggested I was being forgetful or had misplaced the items. One afternoon, I decided to talk to Mark about my concerns regarding Jake's increasingly distant behavior. We were having coffee on the patio, a rare moment of alone time on a Saturday. "I am worried about Jake," I said, carefully, stirring my coffee. "Have you noticed how he is never around anymore, and when he is home, he barely speaks to me?" Mark sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Easter, he is 17. Teenagers need space. They do not want to hang out with their parents." "It feels like more than that," I persisted. "It is like he is deliberately avoiding me specifically." "Not you, just me. You are overthinking it," Mark dismissed with a wave of his hand. "He is just being a teenager. I was the same way at his age." I let the subject drop, but the unease persisted, a constant hum in the background of our daily lives. Jake's grades began slipping around this time too. When a CE notification came from the school portal about his failing chemistry grade, I tried to approach him with an offer to help. I found him in his room playing video games, headphones on, completely absorbed in his virtual world. "Jake," I said after knocking and receiving a grudging acknowledgement to enter. "I saw your chemistry grade. I was pretty good at science in school. Would you like some help studying for the next test?" He yanked off his headphones, his expression immediately hostile. "Did you seriously check my grades behind my back?" "I did not check them behind your back," I explained calmly. "Your dad and I both get the school notifications automatically. I thought I could help." "I do not need your help," he snapped, his voice rising. "And I definitely do not need you spying on me and reporting back to my dad." "Jake, that is not what I am doing. I care about your success. And you are not my mother," he interrupted, his face flushed with anger. "Stop trying to act like you are." The outburst left me stunned and hurt. I retreated from his room, fighting back tears, wondering where this level of hostility had come from. When I told Mark about the interaction, he again minimized it. "He is under a lot of pressure with college applications coming up," Mark explained. He did not mean it personally, but it had felt intensely personal, a deliberate rejection of my role in his life after years of trying to build a relationship. The situation escalated when I accidentally discovered inappropriate texts on Jake's phone. He had left it on the kitchen counter while going to take a shower, and it kept buzzing with notifications. Not intending to snoop but concerned about the constant alerts, I glanced at the screen and saw messages from someone named Tyler discussing a party where they planned to bring alcohol and marijuana. This discovery left me in a difficult position. I knew Mark needed to know about his son's potentially dangerous behavior, But I also knew that approaching this wrong could further and damage my already fragile relationship with Jake. After careful consideration, I decided to talk to Mark about implementing more structure and discipline in Jake's life without specifically mentioning the texts. I did not want to betray Jake's privacy entirely, hoping that general boundaries might address the specific concerning behaviors. That conversation did not go as planned. Mark became immediately defensive when I suggested that Jake might benefit from more structure. Are you saying I am not parenting my son properly? He asked, his tone sharp. Not at all, I backpedaled, surprised by his reaction. I just think that teenagers sometimes need clear boundaries, especially when they are making choices that could affect their future. What choices exactly are you referring to? Mark pressed. Just general teenage stuff, I said vaguely, not wanting to reveal what I had seen on the phone without being certain how Mark would handle it. I have been raising Jake for 17 years, Mark said coldly. I think I know what he needs better than someone who has been in his life for a fraction of that time. The conversation ended with tension lingering in the air, and, as I turned to leave the room, I caught sight of Jake standing in the hallway, a satisfied smirk playing on his lips, before he quickly rearranged his features into a neutral expression. It was brief but unmistakable, and a chill ran down my spine as I realized he had been listening and was pleased by the discord he had witnessed. Around this time, Jake started dating a girl named Brittany, who seemed to instantly dislike me despite our minimal interactions. When she came over for dinner, she would speak warmly to Mark, while giving me curtly polite responses. I overheard her once telling Jake, I do, and not know how you deal with having her around all the time. When she thought I was out of earshot, my discomfort in my own home grew steadily. I began to feel like an intruder rather than a family member walking on eggshells to avoid triggering Jake's hostility or causing another argument with Mark. The home I had so lovingly decorated no longer felt like my sanctuary, but a battleground where I was increasingly outnumbered. Yet, despite the growing tension, I continued to believe that this was just a difficult phase that we would eventually work through. I had invested too much of my heart and time in this family to give up at the first real challenge. So, I persisted, holding on to hope that with enough patience and love things would improve. I had no idea that the worst was yet to come and that my place in this family was far more precarious than I had ever imagined. My 34th birthday should have been a celebration surrounded by family. I had reserved a table at an upscale Italian restaurant weeks in advance, excited about spending quality time with Mark and Jake. The morning of my birthday, I came downstairs to find Mark preparing my favorite breakfast, French toast with fresh berries and a beautiful bouquet of leaves on the table. Happy birthday. Beautiful, he said, kissing me tenderly. I have got reservations at 7 tonight. Where is Jake? I asked, noticing his absence. Mark's expression shifted slightly. He texted that he forgot about a study group for a big test tomorrow. He is really sorry he cannot make breakfast. I swallowed my disappointment, but he will be at dinner, right? I made those reservations 3 weeks ago. Mark hesitated, placing the plate of French toast in front of me. Actually, that is something we need to talk about. Jake mentioned last night that his friend Tyler is having people over to work on their senior project. It is a big part of their grade. And on my birthday, I interrupted, unable to hide my hurt. He knew about this dinner. We talked about it just last weekend. I know, and he feels terrible, Mark said. Though I doubted Jake felt anything of the sort, but this project is really important for his college applications. So, you are letting him skip my birthday dinner for a project he supposedly just found out about? I asked, my appetite vanishing. Easter, try to understand. Senior year is crucial for his future. I cannot force him to miss something that affects his grades. In that moment, I felt invisible, my special day easily discarded for what was most likely another lie from Jake, but I swallowed my hurt, nodding silently as Mark apologized again and promised to make it up to me. That evening at the restaurant, the empty chair across from us seemed to mock my naive belief that we were truly a family. Mark tried to compensate by being extra attentive, but the message was clear when forced to choose. Jake came first, and I was a distant second. On the drive home, I finally voiced my feelings. Mark, I feel like an outsider in my own family. Today, he made that painfully clear. That is not fair, he defended. It was just unfortunate timing with his project. It is not just today, I said, my voice trembling. It is a pattern. Jake consistently excludes me, and you consistently allow it. We argued for hours that night, going in circles as Mark defended his son, while I tried to make him see the hurtful pattern that had developed. We eventually reconciled with exhausted apologies, but something fundamental had shifted. The argument exposed a fault line in our marriage that would only widen in the coming weeks. After my birthday, Jake became bolder in his disrespect. I began noticing that Mark would look at me differently sometimes, with questions in his eyes where there had once been only trust. Later, I discovered that Jake had been making comments to his father when I was not around. Subtle suggestions that I was different when Mark was not home. She gets really angry sometimes. Dad, I overheard him saying one evening when they thought I was still out running errands. I do not want to cause problems, but he stopped talking when I entered the house, exchanging a look with Mark that made my stomach tighten with anxiety. The incidents multiplied. My laptop, an expensive model I needed for work presentations, was found with water damage one afternoon, Jake claimed. He had no idea what happened, though it had been perfectly fine when I left it on my desk that morning. Only Jake had. I'd been home during that time, ostensibly sick from school. After the laptop incident, Mark began questioning me more frequently about my interactions with Jake. He says, "You yelled at him yesterday about his laundry," he said, one evening, his tone casual, but his eyes watchful. "That never happened," I said, shocked by the blatant lie. "I was in meetings all day yesterday. I barely saw him." Mark nodded, but I could tell he was not entirely convinced. He seemed pretty upset about it. "Mark, I am telling you that absolutely did not happen. Jake is lying to you." His expression hardened. "That is a serious accusation, Easter. Why would my son lie about something like that?" I had no answer that would not sound like I was attacking Jake. So, I retreated from the both conversation, a knot of dread forming in my stomach. Our home became a place of tension and unspoken accusations. I began feeling uncomfortable, even performing routine tasks like laundry or cleaning, afraid that Jake would twist my actions into something malicious to report to his father. The walls seemed to close in as my safe space transformed into hostile territory. My friend Sophia noticed the change in me during our lunch breaks. "You look exhausted," she said one day, her concern evident. "Is everything okay at home?" I broke down, then telling her everything: Jake's escalating behavior, Mark's growing suspicion, my increasing isolation within my own family. Sophia listened, her expression grave. "Easter. This sounds like deliberate alienation," she said finally. "Jake is systematically turning your husband against you, and Mark is allowing it. You need professional help, maybe family counseling." Buoyed by Sophia's support, I cautiously suggested counseling to Mark that evening. "I think we could all benefit from talking to someone. There are communication issues affecting all of us." Mark's reaction was swift and defensive. "We do not need a stranger telling us how to be a family. This is just a rough patch." "Mark, it is more than a rough patch," I insisted. "I feel like I am being pushed out of my own home." "Now you are being dramatic," he said dismissively. "Jake is just going through typical teenage stuff and you are taking it personally." The rejection of counseling felt like another door, closing another potential path to resolution blocked. Things took an even darker turn when I discovered my personal documents had been rummaged through in our home office. My passport had been moved and financial statements were out of order. When I checked my personal bank account, I discovered $500 missing from a recent deposit. Only Mark had access to that account besides me, as we had set up emergency access for each other's personal accounts early in our marriage. When I approached Mark about the missing money, his confusion seemed genuine, but he offered no explanation. "Maybe you transferred it and forgot," he suggested. You have been under a lot of stress lately. The gaslighting was becoming a constant, making me question my own memory and perceptions. Was I really just forgetting things? Was I overreacting to normal teenage behavior? The questions plagued me, eroding my confidence and sense of reality. Around this time, I noticed that Mark's parents, Barbara and Richard, had become noticeably cooler toward me during their visits. Barbara, who had once warmly included me in family discussions, now directed most of her conversation to Mark and Jake, treating me almost like an acquaintance rather than family. After they left following Sunday dinner, I asked Mark if he had noticed the change. He shrugged it off. They are just concerned about Jake. He told them you have been particularly hard on him lately. What? I exclaimed. That is completely false. What exactly did he tell them? Just that you criticize him constantly and make him feel unwelcome in his own home, Mark said, as if repeating something he had heard multiple times. They are his grandparents' Easter. They are naturally protective. The realization that Jake was spreading lies about me beyond our immediate household hit me like a physical blow. The careful image I built with Mark's family was being systematically dismantled by a teenager with an agenda I could not fully comprehend. My isolation grew as Jake's campaign continued. Friends who had once regularly visited our home were told by Jake that I preferred not to have guests over. Mark's colleagues, who had become our social circle, were fed subtle misinformation about my moods and behavior. Piece by piece, my support system was being chipped away, leaving me increasingly alone with my mounting anxiety and fear. What I did not realize, then, was that all of these incidents were merely the build-up to a catastrophic breaking point, a carefully orchestrated campaign leading to an explosion that would shatter the life I had so carefully constructed. And I was walking directly into the trap, completely unprepared for the betrayal waiting just around the corner. The business trip to Seattle was supposed to last 3 days, but the client meetings concluded early, allowing me to catch an afternoon flight home instead of staying overnight as planned. I had not told Mark about the change in plans, thinking it would be a nice surprise to come home a day early. Looking back, I wish I had texted ahead, given him warning. Perhaps things would have unfolded differently, but I did not, and that decision altered the course of my life. The house looked normal from the outside when my taxi pulled up at 6:00 the evening, but as I approached the front door, I could hear music pulsing from inside, much louder than Mark would typically allow. Using my key, I entered to find our living room transformed into a party scene straight out of a teen movie. Jake and at least 10 other teenagers were sprawled across our furniture. The coffee table held several bottles of liquor, some already half empty, and the unmistakable smell of marijuana hung in the air. Plastic cups and snack bags littered the floor, and someone had spilled something dark on the cream-colored rug I had purchased just 2 months earlier. For a moment, no one noticed me standing in the entryway, stunned by the scene before me. Then a girl spotted me and nudged Jake, whose eyes widened in alarm when he saw me. The music continued blaring as Jake stumbled to his feet, clearly intoxicated. "What is going on here?" I asked, my voice cutting through the music. "Where is your father?" Jake fumbled with his phone, lowering the music from a remote app. "He is at a work dinner," he slurred slightly. "He will not be home until late." I surveyed the scene again, noting the various substances and the clearly underage drinking occurring in my home. Taking a deep breath, I spoke with as much calm authority as I could. "Muster. Everyone who does not live here needs to leave right now," I said firmly. "The party is over." There were groans of protest, but when I moved to the sound system and shut it off completely, the teens began gathering their belongings. Jake stood watching, his expression moving from surprise to something darker as his friends filed out. Once the last teenager had left, I turned to Jake. "What were you thinking? There was alcohol and drugs in our house with minors. Do you understand how serious this is?" "It is not a big deal," he muttered, swaying slightly on his feet. "Everyone does it. It is absolutely a big deal," I countered, moving to collect the alcohol bottles. "This is illegal, Jake. You and your friends could get in serious trouble." Not to mention the damage to our home. Just leave it, he snapped. Suddenly hostile. I will clean it up before Dad gets home. He does not need to know about this. I am not going to lie to Comlis. Your father, I said, continuing to gather the evidence of the party. He needs to know what happened. That was when Jake's demeanor changed completely. The sullen teenager disappeared, replaced by someone calculating and cold. He pulled out his phone and turned away, his voice low and urgent as he made a call. Dad, I heard him say, his voice is suddenly tearful and frightened. You need to come home right now. Easter is freaking out. She hit me, Dad. I do not know what to do. I froze in disbelief, the bottle in my hand nearly slipping to the floor. Jake, I exclaimed. That is a complete lie. He ignored me, continuing his performance for Mark. I am scared. Please come home, he pleaded before hanging up. Why would you say that? I demanded, my heart pounding with the realization of what he had just done. Your father is going to believe I assaulted you. That never happened. Jake's eyes met mine, and the coldness I saw there chilled me to the bone. For the first time, I glimpsed the deliberate malice behind his actions of the past months. This was not teenage rebellion or adjustment difficulties. This was calculated destruction. It is your word against mine, he said with a shrug. And Dad always believes me. I tried calling Mark immediately, but my calls went straight to voicemail. Text messages went unread as I frantically tried to explain what had really happened before he arrived home. The 20 minutes it took for Mark to return home were among the longest of my life as I watched Jake methodically creating a narrative that would destroy me. He messed up his hair, rumpled his clothes, and went to the bathroom, returning with water splashed on his face to simulate tears. Most disturbingly, he pressed his arm repeatedly against the edge of the counter, creating a red mark that would likely bruise manufacturing physical evidence for his false claim. When Mark burst through the door, his face was a prosecalled in time, a mask of fury and concern. He went straight to Jake, who launched into a performance worthy of an award. She just lost it. Dad, Jake sobbed, showing the developing bruise on his arm. I had a few friends over and she started screaming and throwing things. When I tried to calm her down, she grabbed me and pushed me against the wall. That is absolutely not what happened, I interjected, my voice shaking with disbelief. Mark, he had a full party here with alcohol and drugs. I sent his friends at home and was cleaning up when he called you with this outrageous lie. Mark looked around at the remaining evidence of the party, then back at his son. Is this true? You had alcohol here. For a moment, I thought reason might prevail, but Jake had his story ready. It was just a couple of beers that someone brought over without telling me, he said, his voice convincingly contrite. I was about to ask them to leave when Easter came home early and just exploded. She has always hated me, Dad. She was just waiting for an excuse. That is not true, I said desperately. Mark, you know me. You know I would never hurt Jake. Please, you have to believe me. Mark looked between us, his expression tortured. Then his eyes settled on the reaming mark on Jake's arm, and I saw his decision form before he spoke it. Pack a bag. Easter, he said quietly, a voice like ice. I want you out of this house tonight. The words hit me like a physical blow. Mark, please, I begged. This is all a lie. Jake is manipulating you. I saw the bruise forming with my own eyes, Mark said, his voice rising. My son is terrified of you right now. I need you to leave until we figure this out. Where am I supposed to go? I asked, tears finally breaking through my shock. Call a friend, get a hotel. I do not care right now, he said coldly. I just need you out of this house and away from my son. Mark, this is my home too. I protested weakly. This was my house before you moved in, he reminded me harshly. And I never thought you would hurt my son. I guess we were both wrong about some things. I looked at Jake, standing slightly behind his father, and caught the flash of triumph in his eyes before he quickly resumed his victim pose. In that moment, I realized how completely I had been outmaneuvered by a 17-year-old who had orchestrated my reprisals. a removal from his life with frightening precision. With no choice and nowhere to turn, I went upstairs to pack a bag, my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip my suitcase. Through my tears, I called Sophia, who immediately offered her spare bedroom without question. Coming back downstairs with my luggage was one of the most humiliating moments of my life. Mark stood with his arms crossed, watching me silently as I gathered my purse and phone charger from the kitchen counter. "I never thought you would choose to believe such an obvious lie," I said quietly, meeting his eyes one last time. 7 years together, and this is all it takes to forget who I really am. "I know what I saw," Mark said firmly. "The bruise does not lie." "No, but your son does," I replied, my voice breaking. "And one day you will realize that, but it will be too late." As I walked out the door, I glanced back to see Jake standing in the hallway, a small satisfied smirk playing on his lips when his father was not looking. That expression confirmed everything I needed to know about his deliberate campaign to remove me from their lives. Driving to Sophia's apartment, I called Mark repeatedly, but my calls continued going to voicemail. I sent text after text explaining what had really happened, begging him to look at the evidence around him, to question why Jake would call him instead of the police if he had truly been assaulted, to remember who I was and our years together. All went unanswered as the night stretched on. When I arrived at Sophia's cottage, she took one look at my tear-streaked face and pulled me into a tight hug. "Whatever happened, we will figure it out," she promised as I collapsed into sobs in her arms. That night, as I lay on Sophia's guest bed staring at the ceiling, I felt as if my entire world had been ripped away in an instant. The home I had created, the man I loved, the life I had built, all gone because of a teenager's lies and a husband who had chosen to believe the worst about me without a moment's hesitation. The next morning, when Mark's parents arrived at the house to support their son and grandson through this difficult time, Jake's victory was complete. He had successfully ejected me from the family and rallied everyone to his side, all while painting me as the villain in a story he had carefully crafted over months. What none of them realized was that in pushing me out, they had freed me from the web of manipulation I had been trapped in. And in the coming weeks, that freedom would give me the clarity and strength to fight back in ways none of them could have anticipated. The first night at Sophia's apartment, I barely slept, cycling between tears, anger, and disbelief. By morning, though, something had shifted inside me. The initial shock was giving way to a simmering determination that would only grow stronger in the coming days. "You need legal advice," Sophia said over coffee, watching me check my phone for messages from Mark that still had not come. "This is beyond a simple misunderstanding. He threw you out of your home based on a lie." I nodded slowly, the reality of my situation coming into sharper focus. "You are right. I need to protect myself." That afternoon, Sophia connected me with her cousin, Patricia Williams, one of the top divorce attorneys in the city. I had balked initially at the word divorce, still hoping that Mark would come to his senses, but Patricia's frank assessment during our first consultation changed my perspective completely. "Based on what you have told me, your husband has shown where his loyalties lie," she said, her sharp eyes assessing me across her polished desk. "The question now is not whether you can salvage this marriage, but how you can protect yourself going forward." Under Patricia's guidance, I began meticulously documenting everything. I created a detailed timeline of Jake's escalating behaviors over the past months, noting each incident when items went missing, when arguments erupted, and when Mark had taken his son's side without investigation. Patricia also advised me to conduct a thorough review of our financial situation. Men who make decisions this impulsively often make financial moves just as rashly, she warned. She was right. When I accessed our online banking, I discovered that Mark had already moved $15,000 from our joint savings account to his personal account, the very morning after he had kicked me out. The betrayal stung, but it also hardened my resolve. With Patricia's help, I began gathering evidence systematically. I reached out to our neighbors, the Johnsons, who had Pablo security cameras that partially captured our front yard and driveway. They provided footage showing Jake's friends, leaving our house that evening clearly intoxicated, but showing no signs of the chaos Jake had described. More importantly, the timestamp on the video proved that I had not been alone with Jake long enough to cause the violent confrontation he had fabricated. Patricia also helped me secure my financial position, moving my direct deposits to a new account and documenting all the investments and property I had contributed to during our marriage. I had paid for the kitchen renovation in our home the previous year using inheritance money from my grandmother. I had receipts for every piece of furniture. I had purchased every improvement I had made to Mark's house over our years together. Through social media monitoring, we discovered something that turned my stomach but strengthened my case. Jake had posted in a private group that one of his friends had screenshot and sent to me. Finally, got the stepmom out of the picture. Dad fell for it. Hook, line, and sinker. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking, but it was also undeniable evidence of his deception. While I was rebuilding my life and preparing my case, Mark maintained his silence. My calls and texts went unanswered for days, then weeks. The only communication came through Patricia, who received a brief email from Mark, stating that I could arrange to collect more of my belongings while he and Jake were out of the house on Saturday afternoon. 3 weeks passed in this limbo. I continued going to work, explaining my situation to my sympathetic boss, who allowed me flexible hours to meet with Patricia and get my life in order. Sophia's guest room became my temporary home. Her friendship a lifeline in the darkest period of my life. My sister Laurel flew in from Portland to support me. Her presence, a reminder that I still had family who believed in me and stood by me without question. With Laurel and Sophia flanking me like protective sentries, I returned to the house that Saturday to gather more clothes and personal items. Walking through the home I had made beautiful felt surreal. Pictures of our wedding still hung on the walls. My cookbook still lined the kitchen shelves, my garden visible through the windows with the rose bushes I had planted beginning to bloom. Yet I was now an intruder here, allotted a 2-hour window to collect my possessions like a thief in reverse. Laurel found me, sitting on the edge of our bed, a framed photo of Mark and me from our anniversary trip to Napa Valley in my discredited hands. "This is not the end of your story, Easter," she said gently, sitting beside me. "This is just the end of a chapter, and the next one is going to be so much better because you will be free from people who do not deserve you." Her words resonated deeply, planting the seed of a new perspective. Perhaps this painful ejection from my marriage was not a tragedy, but an opportunity. A chance to rebuild a life without the constant undermining and gaslighting I had endured. As the 3-week mark approached, I underwent a physical transformation that mirrored my internal one. I cut my long hair into a sleek bob that made me feel lighter and more modern. I joined a morning kickboxing class, channeling my hurt and anger into physical strength. I purchased new clothes that reflected who I was, becoming rather than who I had been trying to be for Mark and Jake. I also began reconnecting with old friends who had gradually fallen away during my marriage. Looking back, I could see how Mark had subtly isolated me, always, and having reasons why certain friendships were problematic or why we needed to focus on family time instead of my social connections. One by one, I reached out to these women, rebuilding bridges and expanding my support network, beyond Sophia and Laurel. On the exact 3-week anniversary of the night Mark had thrown me out, my phone rang with his number. I stared at it for several rings, my heart pounding before answering with a calm hello that belied the turmoil inside me. "Easter." "Mark," said his voice, carrying a forced casualness. "I think it is time we talked about what Mark," I asked, keeping my tone neutral as Patricia had advised about what happened, about our marriage, about whether you have had time to reflect on your actions and are ready to discuss coming home. The audacity of his assumption that I would be begging to return after his betrayal left me momentarily speechless. When I found my voice again, it was steadier than I had expected. "Yes, I think we should talk," I agreed. "In person, tomorrow at 1 at LeMayan." I named an upscale restaurant downtown, public enough to prevent a scene but private enough for a serious conversation. That works, Mark said, sounding relieved that I had agreed so easily. I will see you then. After hanging up, I called Patricia immediately. He wants me to come back, I explained. He thinks I am going to apologize. Perfect, Patricia said, and I could hear the satisfied smile in her voice. Then, he will not see what is coming. Bring the papers tomorrow. I will have everything ready. That night, I barely slept, mentally rehearsing what I would say, how I would remain composed when facing the man who had broken my heart and betrayed my trust so completely. By morning, I felt a strange calm, a certainty that I was doing exactly what needed to be done. Laurel helped me select my outfit, a tailored navy dress that conveyed confidence and professionalism rather than trying to rekindle romantic feelings. As she zipped me up, she squeezed my shoulders. Remember who you are, she said firmly. Not who he thinks you are, who you actually are. With those words fortifying me, I collected the manila envelope from Patricia's office and headed to the restaurant, ready to close one chapter of my life and begin writing a new one entirely on my terms. LeMason was busy with the lunch crowd when I arrived 5 minutes early for our meeting. I had chosen this restaurant deliberately, not just for its public setting, but because it was a place I loved that Mark had always found pretentious. Being here was my first small act of reclaiming my preferences. After years of compromise, I asked for a table near the back where the noise of other diners would provide privacy for a conversation while still being public enough to discourage any outbursts. The hostess led me to a corner table partially screened by a decorative partition, perfect for my purposes. Mark arrived exactly at 1, always punctual. He spotted me and walked over, and I had a moment to observe him unnoticed. He looked tired, with new lines around his eyes and a slight slump to his shoulders that had not been there 3 weeks ago. A petty part of me was satisfied to see the physical evidence of his stress. Easter, I said, leaning down as if to kiss my cheek before thinking better of it and awkwardly sliding into the seat across. From me, you look different. Good, different. Thank you, I replied, coolly, not returning the compliment. How have you been? It has been a difficult few weeks, he admitted, signaling for a waiter. For all of us, we ordered drinks. Mark a scotch, despite the early hour. Me, a sparkling water with lime. As the waiter departed, Mark leaned forward, his expression serious. I have been doing a lot of thinking, Easter, about what happened about our marriage. Family is important, and I think we owe it to ourselves to try to work through this. His words were reasonable, even conciliatory, but they revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of our situation. He still saw this as a temporary separation, a bump in the road we could smooth over with enough effort. I have been thinking too, I said, taking a sip of my water when it arrived. About loyalty and trust. About what makes a marriage work? Mark nodded eagerly. Exactly. These are challenging times. With a teenager in the house, it requires patience and understanding from everyone. No, Mark, I said firmly. What? It requires is trust. And you showed me exactly how much you trust me when you chose to believe Jake's lies without even questioning them. His expression darkened slightly. Easter? I saw the bruise with my own eyes. What was I supposed to think? You were supposed to think that your wife of 7 years, who has never shown a violent tendency in her life, might be telling the truth. I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the anger rising inside me. You were supposed to consider that your 7-year-old son, who has been increasingly hostile toward me for months, might be lying. That is a serious accusation, Mark said, echoing his words from weeks earlier. Jake is my son and I was your wife, I replied, emphasizing the past tense. Was Mark? His eyes widened slightly at my word. Choice, are you saying? I reached into my purse and removed the manila envelope. Patricia had prepared, placing it on the table between us. I am filing for divorce. For a moment, Mark simply stared at the envelope as if it might disappear if he looked at it long enough. Then he gave a short, disbelieving laugh. You cannot be serious. This is an overreaction to a speed-a-day misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I repeated, incredulous. You threw me out of my home, based on a lie. You cut off communication for 3 weeks. You moved money from our joint account without discussion. That is not a misunderstanding, Mark. That is a fundamental breach of trust. Mark's phone buzzed on the table. Jake's name flashed on the screen, but Mark ignored it, focusing on me with growing concern. Easter, I admit I reacted strongly that night, but you have to understand, seeing Jake upset like that. Let me show you something, I interrupted, pulling out my phone and opening the folder of evidence I had compiled. This is security footage from the Johnsons' house across the street. The timestamp shows Jake's friends leaving at 6:15. That evening, my call to Sophia was at 6:23. That gives 8 minutes for me to supposedly assault Jake and for him to call you in tears. I slid the phone across to Mark, who watched the footage, with a deepening frown. This does not prove anything he said, but his voice lacked conviction. How about this? I continued, showing him the screenshot of Jake's social media post. Your son bragging about getting me out of the picture. Does that seem like the behavior of a victim or someone who orchestrated this whole situation? Mark's face pat as he read the post. This could be taken out of context, he said weakly, and this I pulled out statements from 2 of Jake's friends, who had been at the party, testifying that I had simply asked everyone to leave and had not touched Jake. Patricia had contacted them directly, appealing to their sense of right and wrong. Mark's phone buzzed again, more insistently this time, Jake calling repeatedly. Mark silenced it, his expression troubled as the evidence mounted. Why are you showing me all this? He asked finally. Because I want you to know exactly what you threw away, I said calmly. I want you to understand that this divorce is not an emotional reaction, but a carefully considered decision based on your actions and your son's manipulation. Mark's demeanor changed, then desperation replacing his initial confidence. Easter, please. We can work through this. Coob's therapy, family counseling, whatever it takes. Now that I see this evidence. Now, I interrupted. Why not 3 weeks ago? Mark, why did you not ask for evidence then, when it actually mattered? Why did you automatically assume the worst about me? He had no answer for that, and we both knew it. The divorce papers outline my terms. I continued, pushing the envelope toward him. I have documented every financial contribution I made to our home, every improvement, every piece of furniture I purchased. Patricia has calculated a fair division of assets that takes into account the years I spent making your house a home. Mark stared at the envelope, making no move to take it. You have a lawyer already. I had a lawyer the day after you threw me out, I confirmed. Because unlike you, I did not make life-altering decisions in the heat of the moment. His phone buzzed yet again, and this time Mark glanced at it with visible annoyance. Jake keeps calling. He never calls this many times. Unless it is important. Maybe he senses that his plan is unraveling, I suggested. Maybe he knows you are here with me and is worried about what I am telling you. Mark hesitated, then answered the phone. Jake, I cannot talk right now. I am in the middle of something important. Even from across the table I could hear Jake's agitated voice. Mark's expression shifted from annoyed to alarmed as he listened. Calm down, he said. What do you mean? She has evidence. What? Post? He glanced at me, realization dawning. I will be home soon. Just not do anything else. We will talk when I get there. He hung up, looking at me with new understanding. He knows. Does. Not he. About the evidence you just showed me. I nodded. One of his friends probably told him they spoke to my lawyer. The truth has a way of coming out, Mark. Mark looked suddenly exhausted, the weight of reality finally settling on his shoulders. I made a terrible mistake, he admitted quietly. Yes, you did, I agreed without vindictiveness. And now we both have to live with the consequences. Mark reached for my hand across the table, but I pulled back slightly. Easter, please. Give me another chance. Give us another chance. Now that I know what really happened. It is not just about what happened that night, I explained. feeling a strange calm despite the emotional conversation. It is about what has been happening for months. It is about you consistently choosing Jake over me, dismissing my concerns, allowing him to undermine me in our home. That night was just the culmination of a pattern that would have continued even if this particular incident had not occurred. Mark's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it and his face tightened. Jake is saying you are lying, that you manufactured evidence to frame him. Of course he is, I said with a sad smile. And 3 weeks ago, you would have believed him without question. Do you still? The question hung between us, a test Mark seemed to finally understand the importance of. After a long moment, he shook his head. No, he said quietly. I do not think I do. Then perhaps you are starting to see what I have been trying to tell you all along. Mark looked broken. The realization of what he had done, what he had lost, finally sinking in. What happens now? He asked. Now you take these papers to your lawyer, I said, pushing the envelope toward him again. You can fight me on this and drag it out painfully for both of us. Or you can accept the reasonable terms I have proposed, and we can both move forward with our lives. Mark finally took the envelope, his hands not quite steady, and us. Is there any chance at all? No, Mark, I said gently but firmly. That ended the moment you told me to get out of our home. Some things cannot be undone. His phone buzzed again. More texts from Jake, growing increasingly frantic. Mark silenced the phone completely, looking at me with genuine regret. I need to go deal with this with him. I think there is a lot I have been avoiding seeing. I nodded, understanding that Mark was facing his own difficult confrontation ahead. Good luck, I said sincerely. Jake needs help, Mark. Real help. Not enablement. As Mark stood to leave, he paused, looking down at me. You seem different. Stronger. I am, I agreed. It turns out having your life destroyed can be clarifying. I know who I am now and what I deserve. After Mark left, I remained at the table, ordering lunch and a glass of wine, celebrating this moment of reclaiming my life in my own quiet way. The conversation had gone exactly as Patricia and I had planned, perhaps even better. I had maintained my composure, presented my evidence effectively, and stood my ground without becoming emotional. As I sipped my wine, I wondered what was happening at Mark's house, imagining Jake's fury when he realized his carefully constructed narrative was crumbling. I felt no joy in their conflict, only a distant sadness for what could have been if Jake had accepted me and if Mark had been the partner I deserved. But that sadness was overshadowed by a growing sense of liberation. For the first time in years, I was making decisions solely for myself, without considering their impact on a husband who did not value me, or a stepson who actively worked against me. The freedom was both terrifying and exhilarating, a blank canvas on which I could create a new life entirely of my own design. By the time I finished my meal, Mark had called 3 times, leaving increasingly urgent voicemails that I chose not to listen to immediately. Whatever crisis was unfolding in his household was no longer my responsibility to manage. That realization alone was worth celebrating with a second glass of wine and the chocolate dessert I had always loved, but Mark had always thought too indulgent. Sometimes I reflected as I savored each bite. The end of one story is simply the necessary beginning of a much better one. 6 months can change everything. As I stood at the window of my new apartment, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in shades of pink and gold, I hardly recognized the woman I had been when Mark first told me to leave our home. My new place was smaller than the house we had shared, but it was entirely mine, decorated exactly to my taste without compromising for anyone else's preferences. The living room featured the bold, abstract art Mark had always disliked. The kitchen had the high-end appliances I had always wanted, but Mark had deemed unnecessary. Every corner reflected my personality, my choices, my life reclaimed. The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier with surprisingly little conflict after our initial confrontation. Mark had reviewed the terms with his lawyer and agreed to most of them without argument. Patricia had been both surprised and pleased by his cooperation, though we both suspected it stemmed more from guilt than generosity. He knows he messed up, Patricia had said during our final meeting, and he knows that fighting you would only make him look worse in everyone's eyes, including his own. Financial settlement had been fair, allowing me to purchase this apartment and still have enough savings to feel secure. I received half the value of the improvements I had made to Mark's house compensation for the furniture I left behind, and a portion of our joint investments proportional to my contributions during our marriage. What the settlement could not compensate for was the emotional toll of the betrayal, the humiliation of being thrown out of my home, the painful realization that 7 years of marriage could be discarded so easily. That healing had to come from within a slower and more complex process than the legal one. Mark had called repeatedly in the days following our meeting at La Maison, leaving voicemails that evolved from desperate pleas for reconciliation to sober acknowledgments of his failure as a husband. I listened to them all, but responded to none, needing the space and time to process my feelings without his influence. From mutual friends, I learned what had happened when Mark returned home that day. Jake, realizing his father had seen the evidence, had launched into a defensive tirade that quickly devolved into an accidental confession. In his anger, he had revealed too much, confirming that he had deliberately orchestrated my removal from their home. The revelation had forced Mark to confront years of enabling behavior, of allowing Jake to manipulate situations to his advantage, of failing to set appropriate boundaries. It was a painful awakening that apparently led to several intense arguments, followed by a strained silence between father and son. Jake's behavior had reportedly continued to spiral in the months after I left. His grades plummeted further. He was caught drinking at school and eventually suspended for bullying another student online. The perfect son image he had maintained for his father shattered completely, revealing the troubled teenager beneath. At work, my focus and determination earned me a promotion to senior marketing director, a position I might never have pursued while married to Mark. I had always subtly diminished my ambitions to avoid overshadowing him. Another compromise I had not even recognized until it was no longer necessary. My sister, Laurel, seeing how much I had flourished on my own, made the decision to relocate to be closer to me. She accepted a job at a local sand hospital and found an apartment just 10 minutes from mine. Having family nearby, after years of relative isolation, was a gift I had not known how desperately I needed. Sophia remained my steadfast friend, the one who had witnessed my lowest moment and my strongest comeback. We established a Sunday brunch tradition, meeting weekly to catch up and support each other through life's challenges. Through her, I expanded my social circle, meeting new friends who knew me only as I was now, not as Mark's wife or Jake's stepmother. Therapy became an essential part of my healing journey. Dr. Elaine Carter helped me recognize patterns I had fallen into during my marriage, the ways I had gradually surrendered parts of myself to keep peace, to be accepted, to fulfill a role that was never truly valued. Through our weekly sessions, I rebuilt my sense of self-honoring to trust my perceptions again, after years of having them questioned and dismissed. Gaslighting leaves deep scars, Dr. Carter explained, during one particularly enlightening session. When someone consistently makes you doubt your reality, it erodes your confidence in ways that affect every aspect of your life. Rebuilding that confidence takes time and conscious effort. I put in that effort every day, challenging negative thoughts when they arose, practicing self-compassion when old insecurities surfaced, celebrating small victories and reclaiming my identity. Slowly, the woman who had been systematically undermined and eventually discarded began to disappear, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and unwilling to accept less than she deserved. 4 months after our divorce was finalized, I ran into Mark at a coffee shop downtown. The encounter was unexpected and initially awkward, but strangely lacking in the emotional charge I might have anticipated. He looked diminished, somehow older, and less sure of himself than the man who had once been the center of my world. "Easter," he said, genuine surprise in his voice. "You look wonderful." "Thank you," I replied, noticing how easily I could now speak to him without my heart racing or my stomach nodding. How are you? Managing, he said with a tired smile. Jake is in therapy now. It was long overdue. I nodded, unsurprised by this development. That is good to hear for both of you. It took some serious paralysis incidents to get there. Mark admitted a new humility in his tone. Things I should have addressed years ago. We chatted for a few more minutes, the conversation remarkably civil given our history. As we prepared to part ways, Mark hesitated, then spoke with raw honesty. I made the biggest mistake of my life that night, he said quietly. I know saying sorry does not change anything, but I should have trusted you. I should have seen what was happening. I considered his words, appreciating the apology while recognizing it changed nothing about my current path. Thank you for saying that, Mark. I hope you and Jake both find healing. Are you happy? He asked, a question that might once have felt like an intrusion, but now seemed merely curious. I am, I replied truthfully, not despite what happened, but in some ways because of it. I found myself again, walking away from that chance encounter. I felt an unexpected sense of closure. Mark's acknowledgement of his mistake, while unnecessary for my healing, provided a final period at the end of our story. The chapter was truly finished, now allowing me to focus completely on the new narrative I was creating. That narrative included a tentative new relationship with someone who valued communication and respect. Above all else, Daniel had been a client through my marketing firm, impressed enough with my work to ask me to coffee. Once our professional project concluded, our connection had developed slowly and cautiously, both of us carrying lessons from past relationships that made us mindful of building something healthy from the start. What I admire most about you, Daniel told me one evening as we walked along the riverfront, is your resilience. You took something that could have destroyed you and turned it into a catalyst for growth. That takes incredible strength. His words touched me deeply, recognizing the journey I had been on in a way few others could. Daniel saw me not as a victim of betrayal, but as a survivor who had reclaimed her life, a perspective that aligned perfectly with how I had come to see myself. As for Jake, word reached me through mutual friends that after his suspension and a string of reckless choices, he had finally begun therapy. The mask of the perfect son was gone, leaving him face to face with demons he could no longer hide, shadows born from his parents' divorce and his own need for control. Perhaps, in a twisted way, our family's implosion was the fire that forced him to confront what had been burning inside him all along. But I felt no triumph in his unraveling, only a distant, almost reluctant hope that one day he might choose to grow into the man he was capable of being. Forgiveness was never about him. It was about reclaiming my own peace. 6 months after leaving Mark's house with a single suitcase, I stood in my new apartment walls, painted the color I loved, laughter spilling through every corner. Laurel, Sophia, colleagues, and new friends toasted around me, their glasses raised high. To new beginnings, Laurel declared. And to Easter, who rose from the ashes stronger than ever. The clinking of glasses echoed like a battle drum announcing victory. For the first time in years, I felt not like a survivor but like the author of my own story. Later that night, after the guests had gone, Daniel lingered, helping me gather empty glasses. He looked at me with quiet admiration. Thank you for letting me be part of this new chapter, he whispered as he pulled me into a steady embrace. And in that moment, I realized the woman Mark had thrown out in disgrace no longer existed. I hadn't just healed, I had transformed. The lies that once destroyed me had become the very spark that rebuilt me into someone untouchable, unafraid, and unstoppable. And as I looked out at the city lights glittering against the dark sky, one truth rang louder than all the betrayal I had endured. Sometimes the end of a chapter isn't just survival, it's rebirth. So I ask you, if you've ever been broken by betrayal, what did you discover about yourself when you rose again? Share your story in the comments. And if you're still walking through the fire, let this be your sign. Your worth has never depended on their lies. It lives in your choice to rise, stronger than before.